In this lecture, Capra sets out to examine modern physics and the imbalance that exists from modern culture favouring the irrational masculine over the intuitive feminine. He describes the surge in the awareness of the feminine and the emergence of synergies between modern physics and mysticism as confirmation of a cultural, evolutionary change addressing this imbalance. The imbalance was initiated through an identification of the self with the mind over the totality of being. Newtonian mechanistic and reductionist science fueled the imbalance, focusing on the parts independent of any interrelation with the whole. It was proven defunct following the scientific discoveries in the realms of the quantum atomic and very large realms of the cosmos. Capra chose health and healthcare to demonstrate the limitations of and implications for the old and new models. As examples, he described how biology considers the living organism a machine of parts and treatment of the imbalanced part in isolation to the relationship with and effects on the whole, alleviating symptoms but possibly causing further damage to the whole organism. Psychology disregards the whole, using mechanistic, reductionist stimulus-response models to demonstrate how the mind affects matter. Psychiatry neglects the body, medicine neglects the mind, and there is no physical contact in psychoanalysis. Economics treats all goods equally in terms of profit, disregarding production methods with no contingency for replacement, focused on high production, consumption, and technological growth, representing an unsustainable expansion on a finite earth. The current healthcare system is not focused on health but on disease, with no attention given to preventative systems. It is fueled by the pharmaceutical industry, whose focus is on selling its products. The new modern view of a broader, holistic, and ecological approach proposes an indivisible system with the interrelationships more important than the individual parts. Capra presents a framework for this, which presupposes homeostasis and includes dynamic balance between all of the components of the living organism, as well as the body, psyche, and the environment. Capra concludes that modern science can bring about the social and cultural changes required by giving a scientific basis for adopting a holistic and ecological view. The new modern view of a broader, holistic, and ecological approach proposes an indivisible system with the interrelationships more important than the individual parts. Capra presents a framework for this, which presupposes homeostasis and includes dynamic balance between all of the components of the living organism, as well as the body, psyche, and the environment. Capra concludes that modern science can bring about the social and cultural changes required by giving a scientific basis for adopting a holistic and ecological view. Traditional physics, based on the Newtonian model, has been the scientific vehicle that has driven socio-political and health systems in the West since its inception in the 18th century. And the question posed is, how effective is this reductionist materialistic view in explaining reality and consciousness?
Capra's ideas make specific references to the application of Eastern philosophies in Western cultures. While these ideas are applicable in theory, the absence of a clear definition of Eastern philosophy may obstruct the holistic approach through the individual's lack of understanding. A more complete and acceptable approach would be achieved by considering and presenting the philosophies native to the individual's culture, as opposed to solely referring to Eastern philosophy. While Western medical services in Asian countries are on the increase according to a study by Shen et al. In 2011, there is evidence showing a rise in holistic approaches in Western healthcare systems, Fritjof et al. 2012. The holistic approaches are not only applied to patients, increasingly healthcare professionals benefit from them as well. Burton et al. In 2016 illustrated in their study that mindfulness-based intervention significantly reduced stress amongst professional staff. Rapp et al. In 2015 showed similar findings in a study which applied an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course for health professionals. There is an increasing awareness of the positive effects of holistic medicine within the healthcare system and out of it. This development supports Capra's suggestion of an integral model encompassing both philosophies. There is much supportive evidence available to validate the argument that separation creates more stress on the living organism, yet Capra does not present any evidence in his talk. Forrest and Munn et al. In 2012 demonstrated in their studies that participants with a dualistic mindset were more likely to compromise their physical health, for example by consuming unhealthy food, and therefore viewing the body as a shell. On the other hand, their results also demonstrated that activation of health-related ideas positively affect the participants' mind-body dualism. Findings like these are potentially beneficial to healthcare systems, which are currently in a state of crisis due to a materialistic approach. Most of the evidence-based studies available have been conducted using a Newtonian approach to understand the holistic phenomena. Due to this, meditation and mindfulness have become increasingly more popular in cognitive behavioral therapy, also known as CBT. Studies such as the one of Heltzel et al. In 2011, who used technologies such as the fMRI and the EEG, have helped to describe the beneficial effects of long-term meditators. They found that grey matter concentration in brain regions related to memory and learning processes, emotion regulation, perspective taking and self-referential processing increased due to mindfulness-based stress reduction participation. Capra's lecture lacked the subtleties, though the presented information was well structured and easily accessible.
Traditional physics, based on the Newtonian model, has been the scientific vehicle which has driven socio-political systems in the West since its inception in the 18th century. I look here at some modern research which supports the new physics, that encompasses the macro and the micro and directly impacts upon health and medical frameworks. In the piece, I have taken lessons from cognitive science and consciousness research, where we are witnessing an interdisciplinary shift towards the broader framework of the new physics. Let's begin with a look at consciousness. So here we see Capra's modes of consciousness. He identifies two, the rational and the intuitive, the yang and the yin. He considers the Cartesian division as the philosophical cleave which split the unity of these two. The resultant imbalance created models within society and in particular within healthcare, which have generated a mechanistic worldview, a predominantly yang-based system built around rationality and materialism. It's important to note he does not consider the Newtonian model in itself wrong, but he views it as a limited framework that needs expansion. He suggests the new physics with the more yin-based characteristics of interdependence, organic and ecological views will drive other sciences to a greater realization of the intrinsic and dynamic interconnectivity between self and the cosmos. For Capra, cognitive science transcends traditional paradigms of psychology and biology. In particular, he tells us the Santiago theory of cognition provides the first real scientific theory to rectify the Cartesian separation of mind and matter. This theory, first proposed by Umberto and Varela in 1980, is the identification of cognition, the process of knowing, with the process of life. For these authors, cognition is the very process of life. Interestingly, they highlight that the brain is not the only structure through which the process of cognition takes place. Rather, the entire system of the organism participates regardless of whether it possesses a brain or higher nervous system. This concept of interconnectivity ties into more dualistic schools of consciousness theory, which strike to balance the yang and yin elements of mind and body. Modern-day consciousness theorists such as Rupert Sheldrake support Capra's vision of a move towards reunification. Sheldrake presents a unified field theory of human mind. He views the mind as connected to every primordial element of matter in a highly organized system of streaming energy, which he calls morphic resonance. He presents matter as a subtle, interconnecting web that is self-organizing and shares a collective memory. Traditional reductionist views saw consciousness as brain-driven, man as machine. Richard Dawkins is perhaps one of the best known reductionist theorists. Dawkins diminishes the human potential for a soul and affiliates towards Darwinian neuralism, citing that living beings are the sum of their physical and mental components. For Dawkins, origin of the species was purely accidental, and all evolution and expansion rose from the selfish gene, whose singular purpose was to maximize survival of the fittest. Such views support the traditional view of human beings as biological organisms, with medicine based purely upon examination of anatomy. Interestingly, just as we are witnessing a shift in the paradigm of cognitive science and consciousness research, these more connected views of humanity are now also filtering into mainstream medicine, with the plethora of research highlighting the interplay of environmental factors, psychological factors, and even molecular factors. Tying this back to the Santiago theory, researchers are now pushing that the immune system should be understood as an autonomous cognitive network which is responsible for the body's molecular identity. This shifting view towards interconnectivity of mind, body, and nature itself is currently driving health programs, illness prevention, and health promotion based on embracing more Eastern philosophies of holism and interrelatedness. Unlike the reductionist principles of the old Newtonian framework, the new physics encompasses cognitive science and consciousness research amongst its body of work and provides a broader framework which is more able to encompass the many facets and richness of the human experience. We look forward to a future of yin and yang balance.
We decided to explore the developments and new concepts introduced in the area of health and healthcare in the last 4 decades since Capra's lecture, to confirm a further shift toward pan-spiritualism and pan-physism. As Dr. Capra mentioned, first of all, we should understand what is health. In the late 40s, World Health Organization defined health to be not a health-oriented, but a disease-oriented concept. We looked through the constitution of the WHO and found that it remains firmly committed to the principles set out in the preamble to the constitution. It means that all principles, as well as the definition of health, set out by the representatives of 61 states on 22nd of July 1946, have remained unchanged to this day. Despite the positive attributes that the evolution of the modern sciences has brought into healthcare within the last half century, global health policy continues to rebuke the integration of holistic healthcare. The public policies presented in the medical, clinical, and educational systems have not changed from the mechanistic and reductionist model. When one considers that physics, an example of an exact science, has extended its frontiers from the materialistic to embrace a holistic philosophy, it is difficult to understand why global health policy does not open up to the integrative health approach. Within the classical physics, Dr. Capra demonstrated the perception of mechanistic model of the universe to vary between three fields: biology, psychology, and economy from the perspective of the issues and solutions related to health and healthcare. His primary premise of health being concluded in the conceptual framework of the united balance of the body, psyche, and environment has suggested to refer particularly to these three fields mentioned before. In addition, the healing process in its turn has included three subdivisions: individual, social, and professional healthcare. Now I will briefly refer to the latest developments occurred in each of these fields. In 1978, licensed physicians who practice holistic medicine founded the American Holistic Medical Association. AHMA gives an opportunity to unite all certified, registered, or licensed holistic medicine practitioners by opening for them free associate membership. Similarly, in 1989 has been found the American Holistic Health Association. Also, the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine emerged in 2013, which member boards offer specialty certification examinations for qualified allopathic and osteopathic physicians. Interprofessional communication, collaboration, education, and team-based care are at the heart of these organizations' mission, as they unite and transform the way we think about health and healthcare. In the late 1960s, when the main approaches to study the mind, psychoanalysis and behaviorism, were breaking down and new ones were not yet available for replacement, pioneering founders of the humanistic psychology have brought to light transpersonal aspects. Transpersonal psychology has become a subfield of psychology that integrates the spiritual and transcendent aspects of the human experience. Issues considered in transpersonal psychology include spiritual self-development, self behind the ego, peak mystical experiences, systematic trance, spiritual evolution, practices and crises, religious conversion, altered states of consciousness, and other sublime, divine, and unusually expanded vital experiences. Therefore, pioneering founders, after more than half a century, are still having definitional issues. However, one of the most concise, comprehensive, and empirically based definition is the following. Transpersonal psychology is an approach to psychology that studies phenomena behind the ego within a context of an integrative or holistic psychology that provides a framework for understanding and cultivating human transformation. So the holistic approach which has been suggested by Dr. Capra is fully applied to transpersonal psychology, where the transpersonal psychotherapist has the same role of attendant or assistant in the healing process, and where the notion of the healing organism is similarly homeostatic. This field engages all three subdivisions of healing process mentioned by Fritjof Capra. As a result of our anti-ecological economic activities, between 1960 and 1990, a number of study fields have arisen, including eco-psychology, environmental psychology, deep ecology, environmental justice, and other fields that focus on the human-nature relationships. Ethopsychology, for example, studies the relationship between human beings and the natural world through ecological and psychological principles. It explains the roots of environmental crisis via psychological crisis. That the lack of integration with nature, the surplus of industrialized and technological application have created a huge gap between human beings and nature. and that the disconnection from nature leads humanity to a collective trauma. So, based on this research, what is left for us to conclude? In the last 4 decades, people have started to seek new alternative forms of medicine, which has led to a recollection of innate human knowledge and shift away from a mechanistic view of reality. Capra suggested 3 subdivisions for keeping dynamic balance of health are fully applied to the mentioned developments. However, despite the drastic shift to holistic healing, global health policy continues to deny this integrative health approach. The main reason for this rebuttal is more in line with economical, political, and religious aims and values rather than scientific framework.
We looked at whether there has been a further shift towards pan-spiritualism or panphysicism since Capra's initial lecture, and in this context examined his later lecture and presentation. In his more recent presentations, Capra has cleverly linked science and mysticism by presenting a common destination being a central theme of unity, science getting there from external observations of the quantum realm, and mysticism from reflection within. Previously, having used healthcare to demonstrate the inadequacy of the reductionist method of treatment, he shifts away from physics to living sciences such as ecology to link science and mysticism, demonstrating that ecology, the awareness of connection in nature, involves connection, relationship, interdependence, and oneness, similar to spirituality and mysticism. One of the most important additions he has made to his historical presentations is to mitigate the dichotomy between science and religion by differentiating between religion and spirituality. Redefining in this way allows for much preconceived disunion between science and mysticism to dissolve. We concluded that the new model system that is emerging to address the current imbalance throughout many of our systems is a cultural evolutionary change. In the time of Capra's initial lecture in 1978, this was demonstrated by him in the areas of health and healthcare, and further substantiated by the synergies emerging between modern physics and mysticism. With the old materialistic model being recognised as no longer serving, there is evidence of a further shift away from reductionism in terms of biology, psychology, and eco-psychology towards pan-spiritualism and pan-physicism. The past perception of man as a standalone living organism, driven by the brain, is being replaced by a complex, interrelated, evolving myriad of systems interconnected with others and the world around him. It is clear that the cultural evolutionary change required to address our systematic imbalance is happening now. It is also accepted that this must incorporate all aspects of our societal systems to emerge successfully, including the biological, economical, and psychological, and the individual, extended society, and external interrelated environment. Finally, we believe that this change is being driven by an underlying natural force of evolution in our collective consciousness.